Hello, everyone, and welcome to this seminar on germinations. My name's Paul Merchant from the University of Bristol. I'm one of the co-conveners of this seminar series, along with Gianfranco Selgas at Stockholm University and Jamile Pinheiro Dias from the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies at the School of Advanced Study at the University of London. Jamile, unfortunately, can't be with us this afternoon, but Gianfranco and I are really delighted to be here with you for this latest in the Germinations seminar series. Before I hand over to Gianfranco to introduce our brilliant speaker this afternoon, I'll just say a few words about the seminar series, how it came about, and what its objectives are, and then we'll get started. Just a brief note of housekeeping: this seminar is being recorded, just so you're aware, and it will be available to watch subsequently on the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies website at the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies. So Germinations, the seminar series that you are currently joined in with, is a series of conversations, online transdisciplinary conversations in environmental humanities, engaging research that is with or from or related to Latin America and the Caribbean. When we set this up way back, I was shocked to remember today in 2022, we did so in response to a sense that the institutionalization of environmental humanities in a field had been quite largely an Anglo and Eurocentric endeavor. I think that's a little bit less true now than it was 4 years ago, but still has some truth to it. And I think it's really great that those of us engaged in Latin American environmental humanities research in the UK in particular have this hub. Although, of course, we're because we're online, we're really delighted to be able to welcome participants from all over the world. So we want to open up areas for future research and collaboration with the region, as well as raising questions about the roots and the affordances of the field of environmental humanities as it currently is. So we want this to be a space to explore environmental insights from scholarship, but also from other research-based practices, including artistic work and curatorial work, and build networks and collaborative initiatives. So with that in mind, we're delighted to welcome someone whose work speaks to a lot of those objectives, Salomé Lopes Coelho. I'll hand over in a moment to Gianfranco to introduce Salomé. Salomé is going to speak for about 25 minutes, and that means that we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions after that, and we'll finish at about 5 p.m. UK time. Gianfranco, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm just going to read a few lines to introduce Salomé. So our speaker today, Salomé Lopes Coelho, is a postdoctoral researcher at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, working at the intersection of cinema, aesthetics, and the environmental humanities. She holds a PhD in artistic studies and was a postdoctoral fellow in communication sciences at Nova University, Lisbon, in Portugal, where she researched the rhythms of vegetal and inorganic matter in Latin American experimental cinema, with a focus on women artists and filmmakers. Salomé was also a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Communication Sciences at the same university in Portugal. Her interdisciplinary work has appeared in the Journal of Latin American Culture Studies, Illumines, the Journal of Film Theory, History and Aesthetics, ASAP Cultural Geographies, and the Bulletin of Latin American Research, where you can find the special issue Convection Currents in Latin American and Caribbean Geoaesthetics, which Salomé co-edited with Alejandro Ponce de León. Highly recommended. So about the talk today that Salomé will share with us is a presentation that examines documentary practices addressing lithium extraction conflicts in Covas do Barroso and the Andean Puna, focusing on how cinema constructs the memory of mining as ecological violence. It traces intersections through three figures: dilemma, commons, and backwardness, attending to histories of resistance, dispossession, and lifeways in each context. The films under discussion include science communication works alongside collaborative and experimental documentaries, ranging from institutional productions that support extractivist expansion to community-based projects that foreground local knowledge and contest mining projects within the framework of the so-called green transition. These works render mining thinkable, legitimate, contested, materializing the entanglements of ecological degradation with other histories of violence, including colonialism. Cinema thus functions as a site of memory, of violence, enacting relational embodied spaces where environmental harm, resistance, and accountability are registered and disputed, reshaping transnational imaginaries of extraction. So with that said, Salomé, welcome, bem-vinda. When you're ready, please.
Obrigada. Thank you so much for this presentation and especially for the invitation to join Germinations. It's such a pleasure to join you, to be in conversation with you, and especially also to share my most recent research. This is part of an ongoing research project where I'm focusing on the figurations of ecological violence in documentary film, and especially the extractive violence. This is part of a broader project with a bigger team on the ecoviolence and crimes against nature in the contemporary cultural imagination. But for the purpose of today, I will be sharing a small part of this research, hopefully a small but significant research. And now I'm not seeing you anymore, so please let me know if I need to do anything with my slides. So as Gianfranco kindly said, I will be focusing on ecological violence and documentary cinema, especially in lithium mining conflicts in Covas de Barroso in the north of Portugal and in the Andean Puna, also known as Lithium Triangle, ranging Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And I will be specifically focusing on the cinematic memory of ecological violence in the context of the green transition or green extractivism. And since 2015 Paris Agreement, governments worldwide have pledged carbon neutrality, presenting the energy or green transition as a move away from fossil fuels toward a decarbonized future. Within this transition, the global push toward the renewable energy has sharply increased demand for lithium, a key material for batteries that power electric vehicles and stabilize energy grids. Rather than replacing fossil fuels, the energy transition often adds new extractive layers. Lithium sustains an expanding energy appetite and the growth-oriented model, even when framed as sustainable. So-called renewable futures depend on large-scale mining and remain materially tied to hydrocarbons across production, transport, and other dimensions of supply chain. This dynamic, often termed as green extractivism, extends extractive logics under the language of technological salvation. In the European Union, the Critical Raw Materials Act designates projects such as Portugal's Barroso lithium mine as strategic, accelerating permits while marginalizing local opposition. In the Andean Puna, sites like Salar de Maricunga have become focal points of resistance as water-dependent livelihoods are placed at risk. Beyond their geopolitical positioning, these regions are connected in further ways. In November, for instance, organizations such as Chile Sin Ecocidio, Chile Without Ecocide, and Mining Watch Portugal warned the European Union that green transition policies are increasingly entangled with military supply chains, including aerospace and defense, contributing to weakened democratic oversight. Barroso and Maricunga thus emerge not only as anticipated mining sites, but as interconnected terrains of struggle shaped by shared forms of activism. It is within this tension between the promise of green transition and the extractive violence it conceals that I turn to cinema from Portugal and the Andean Puna, examining how films register and refuse the ecologies of violence concealed and intensified by the green transition, and how they open alternative ways of seeing, feeling, and narrating energy futures. And I do this in dialogue with with these films that I'm sharing now on screen. And this is a brief selection of some of the most recent documentary films addressing lithium mining conflicts in Portugal and the Andean Puna that constitute my provisional atlas. So the Lithium Paradox, the first film I will be looking into, is by Peter Tom Jones, is from 2025 and produced as an output of 2 Horizon Europe funded projects being presented as a science communication film examining the role of lithium in achieving Europe's climate neutrality goals. Savannah and the Mountain on the top right by Paulo Carneiro is a hybrid documentary that follows the villagers of Covas de Barroso as they creatively resist the British company's plans for a massive open-cast lithium mine, integrating musical performances and Western-inspired staging. Living Earth, Terra Viva, on screen, is an intimate portrait of communal livelihoods in Portugal's Barroso region. It centers on the baldios, ancient common lands managed collectively, and traditional agrarian systems recognized as globally important agriculture heritage system in 2018. Salares Andinos is a collective, by Observatorio Plurinacional de Salares Andinos, is a collective documentary focusing on the salt flats of the Andean region, highlighting both their ecological significance and the cultural heritage of local communities. It details the environmental impacts of lithium brine extraction in these hydrologic systems. While not fully up to date, is from 2022, the film strikingly and critically addresses many of the ongoing issues at stake. La Fiebre del Litio, or Lithium Fever, was also produced collectively and is a documentary examining the social ecological impacts of lithium extraction in the northern Andes. The film shows how rising global demands for renewable energy technologies drives mining expansion, leading to severe water depletion and the disruption of indigenous livelihoods, particularly those of Kocha people. Okoya people. It is especially striking in how it distributes responsibility, explicitly naming the agents of ecological violence while recognizing its transspecies victims. And finally, Life Invisible, a very recent film. Most all of them are available online, free accessible. And this one is set in the Atacama Desert and follows microbiologist Cristina Dorador as she searches for microbial life in salt flats, increasingly threatened by water-intensive lithium extraction. And my main question is how cinema, and these films in particular, are intervening in these conflicts. How are they figurating the extractive violence? What kind of specific formal strategies or generic conventions, cinematic techniques are deployed, and how do they mediate the viewer's encounter with extraction? I'm also interested in what role does distribution play in shaping these encounters, and how is cinema implicated in the violence it depicts? And to answer these questions, I draw on this theoretical framework developed by Susan Knittel, Ecologies of Violence. And ecologies of violence are conceived as networks in which apparently disparate acts and histories of violence, such as genocide, colonialism, and ecocide, are interconnected. It's also conceived as networks of cultural representations that make the connectedness of different forms of violence visible. Includes also media ecologies of violence, where repertoires, genre, forms of representation of violence circulate and travel across media and cultural and historical contexts. Networks includes also networks of cultural representations and knowledge production that may themselves be implicated in the violence they depict. In the remainder of my presentation, I will briefly sketch how I approach these questions in my research on documentary film. While analyzing, watching, and these films, I identified 3 main trends that I will be calling figures of extraction that emerge through the films. those are, as Gianfranco said also at the beginning, backwardness, commons, and dilemma. They are here separated for the purposes of this presentation, but of course they overlap and they're not totally isolated one from the other. Let's start with backwardness. In this film, the lithium paradox, as I said, is an output of 2 Horizon Europe funded projects, presents itself as a science communication film that aims to, quoting, establish a dialogue between civil society and the metals and mining industry, end of quote. It forms part of a broader set of 25 Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects with a combined budget of 181 million euros, whose deliverables include initiatives explicitly aimed at organizing public acceptance for extractive projects within and beyond European Union member states. Despite a title that gestures towards a paradox, the film actually adopts a pro-mining stance. It engages directly with the conventions of what Bill Nichols termed the expository mode of documentary filmmaking. This mode is characterized by a direct address to the viewer via voiceover and on-screen text, and an essayistic structure that subordinates image and sound to a central argument. In the lithium paradox, visual materials function as a rhetorical evidence, reinforcing the films through claims while cultivating a persuasive, authoritative tone framed as questions. The expository mode is inherently goal-oriented. It progresses towards a resolution, generating dramatic urgency around the perceived need for a solution. From the opening minutes, and we are now seeing on screen the first moments of this film, so this is within the first minutes, and a voiceover says, people often overlook that everything that was not born or grown was once mined. So we see here people, this general designation, and they proceed to discuss the fact that there's so many lithium in Europe, but the supply chain is not all sufficient within Europe, and this geologist that appears discussing with the filmmaker, that is Peter Tom Jones on the left, and the geologist is on the right, a Portuguese geologist. This is framed in Covas de Barroso. He says, this opposition, it's because they just see the disadvantages. They don't see the advantages. So from the opening minutes, the lithium paradox establishes a binary between a we and a they. The they, the local opposition, is depicted as lacking oversight or knowledge, their positions framed as purely emotional or reactionary, in stark contrast to the supposedly fact-based research of the filmmakers, as we can see in another scene. After trying to film villagers from Covas de Barroso, after being denied to do that, they discuss this reaction by the villagers, saying, oh, the emotions were really tough. You see a lack of trust, even in scientists like us. On the left is Peter Tom Jones, the filmmaker, and on the right, a Finnish scholar that is doing research in Portugal. So this framing constructs a narrative of backwardness from the outset, presenting local resistance as an obstacle to a necessary strategic future. The Barroso region was qualified or disqualified with similar wording by the Estado Novo dictatorship's program of internal colonization, tracing an interconnection of histories of violence. Civilizing discourses framed local populations as backward and morally deviant, portraying the Barroso person or the Barrosão as resistant to disciplined labor and justifying the technocratic reorganization of common lands, the baldios. These logics resurface today as the green transition mobilizes similar narratives to legitimize extractive intervention. Historical accounts also reveal continuities of resistance, from collective actions to block advancing machinery to everyday forms of disobedience, linking past and present struggles over land and autonomy. It's in Portuguese, but this is the content of this article from a newspaper that you can see on screen. This violence is further reinforced through representations of land as empty, degraded or desertified, oscillating between terra nullius and El Dorado imaginaries. Such framings erase existing social and ecological relations, recasting living territories as inert resource frontiers and reducing communal landscapes to extractable commodities, what Macarena Gomes Barris called extractive view. Lithium paradox constructs local as backward, while simultaneously positioning them as subjects of a future they are told they can shape. This future is framed as being in their hands, yet they are depicted as unable to see it clearly, guided by emotion and contradiction rather than reason. Backwardness and futurity thus reinforce one another through a temporal regime of urgency, in which the imperative of the now must overcome the past. And we see this in another fragment of the Lithium paradox, where discussing with a EU Parliament member, one of the most responsible for the Critical Raw Materials Act, she said, "We have the chance to establish a completely new ecosystem, which is future-proven. But if we do not act now to revive it, soon it will really be in decline." But this logic is evident both in the Lithium paradox and in corporate advertising by Chilean lithium mining company operating in the Andean Puna, SQM, encapsulated in the slogan, "We are lithium, we are future." This framing produces competing futures and reveals that the struggle is not only over land, but also over temporalities. One future demands a rupture with the past, projecting a supposedly better horizon that transcends present and historical limits. The other, articulated in films such as Salares Andinos and Lithium Fever, as we are seeing now on screen, reclaims continuity with the past through ancestral relations to land. Crucially, the extractive future is presented as inevitable, despite being highly speculative. In Portugal, there are no proven lithium reserves, no completed feasibility studies, and no demonstrated economic viability. Yet, the scale and promise of extraction are repeatedly amplified through claims of the largest deposit or the biggest mining project, as we heard twice during the Lithium paradox, a rhetoric also deployed in other cases such as Jadar in Serbia. By contrast, films such as Salares Andinos, Life Invisible, The Savannah and the Mountain, and also Living Earth operate differently. Rather than projecting a future that erases the past, they hold multiple temporalities together. Connections to ancestral time, the will to remain as one is, as Ida told me in an interview that we had last year, and the persistence into the future. And I will repeat this part, I think it was not that clear. Connections to ancestral time, the will to remain as one is, and the persistence into the future. So cinema, and both the films themselves and the processes through which they are made, functions here as a practice of conservation, preserving landscapes, social relations, and ways of life. At times, it even periodically reclaims backwardness, as in the naming of the village it covers Barroso in the film Savannah and the Mountain as Far West Barrosão. In doing so, these films activate other histories of violence, including Northern Native American genocide, unsettling extractivist narratives of progress, and situating contemporary struggles within longer histories and acts of dispossession. At the core of contemporary lithium conflicts lies not merely a struggle over resources, but a violent clash between radically different worldviews. In Portugal, this conflict is visible in the baldios, ancient mountain commons governed by local assemblies and sustained through shared practice of grazing, foraging, and small-scale agriculture. Held collectively by parish communities, these lands cannot be sold, seized, or subdivided for individual profit, and the proposed lithium mine is in large part on these lands. What is at stake in mining conflicts, therefore, is a form of collective life anchored in reciprocal relations between humans and non-humans' existence. A productive parallel can be drawn with the Andean IU, a kinship-based communal system grounded in perpetual collective tenure that blocks alienation to outsiders. In both contexts, land is governed through flexible usufruct rights rather than ownership, whether in Barroso or in the Andean Puna, where transhumance and polycultural exchange unfolds across porous and shifting borders. These systems are oriented toward stewardship, reciprocity, operating outside large-scale extractive market logics. Such land regimes are inseparable from relational ontologies that refuse strict human-non-human divisions and hierarchies. In Andean cosmologies, mountains and landscapes are living beings, herd beings to use de la cadena designation, that demand care, offerings, consent. Lithium extraction thus entails an ontological colonialism, an extractive gaze that violently negates these relations by rendering mountains, water, soils, and microbial life as passive matter, severed from agency and from the social and ecological worlds that sustain them. Here I would like to quote also the amazing article by Bárbara Galindo on In the Name of Lithium, and also Paul's text that brilliantly address this question on cinema specifically. La Fiebre del Litio and Invisible Life intervene precisely at this fault line. By foregrounding ancestrality and multi-species entanglements, they refuse the extractive gaze and reassert the interconnectedness between human bodies and more than human existence. By revealing more than human victims, in this case bacteria, as we are seeing on screen, these films both document extractivism's impacts and expose the ontological violence underpinning green extractivism itself, insisting that humans are only one element within a far broader community of existence. This coloniality is a shared axis identified by scholars of researchers of the green transition, including Mariana Riquito, who has developed work in ethnography for a year in Covas de Barroso, Maristela Svampa, Alexander Dunlap, and Diana Vela Almeida and colleagues in their analysis of what they call greening the empire, to which I now turn. Greening the empire refers to the process by which the European Union reframes climate action, most notably through the European Green Deal, as a moral, technical, and economic project that sustain Europe's global power while obscuring its colonial and extractivist foundation. By transforming ecological crisis into an opportunity for green growth, investment, and geopolitical leadership, the European Union externalizes social and environmental costs to non-European territories, producing new green sacrifice zones. Under the language of sustainability, decarbonization, and planetary stewardship, these policies reproduce imperial relations of domination while sidestepping questions of historical responsibility. And we see in this fragment that on top, say there's a lot of hypocrisy in it, being in it the opposition to lithium extraction within Europe. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in this. Lithium is mined in China or in other places in the world. The standards are much lower. Actually, they are, and the opposition are blocking high standard lithium mining. And in Salares Andinos, we also see this is part of SQM propaganda marketing film saying, where they are in the Andean salt flats, and saying, from the power of the sun using absolutely zero water. So it is a very sustainable process. So this constant discourse that is a sustainable process, and Europe does it better, of course. Furthermore, Europe's proclaimed high standards and claims to exceptionalism can be easily dismantled. But before that, I just wanted to point to the film Salares Andinos at the bottom. They clearly name this as eco-coloniality. And besides Europe's exceptionalism and greening the empire, calling it eco-colonialism. But Europe's proclaimed high standards and claims to exceptionalism can be easily dismantled. Suffice it to recall that the Portuguese government fell amid a corruption investigation involving lithium concessions in Barroso and so-called strategic green projects, panel solars, data centers in Portugal. The Prime Minister at the time, António Costa, and we're talking about 2023, 2024, now chairs the European Council, the very institution that sets the political direction of Europe's critical raw materials policy, mining agenda, and green industrial strategies. And to wrap up, this green transition, as it is currently articulated, does not signal a rupture with extractive modernity, but its reconfiguration. Through policies, narratives, visual regimes, films, lithium mining is rendered inevitable, necessary, and future-oriented, while communal worlds, ancestral temporalities, and more than human relations are cast as obstacles to progress. This work sustains Europe's geopolitical and economic power by externalizing ecological violence and rebranding extraction as sustainability. The films I have discussed intervene in this regime, not by on one hand, reinforcing extractive views, but also by offering alternative technical solutions. And not by offering alternative technical solutions, but by refusing extractive temporalities, epistemologies, and ontologies. By foregrounding ancestrality, multi-species, and collective forms of life, they disrupt the extractive view and make visible the ontological violence that underpins green extractivism. These films insist that energy futures are not only a matter of resource or technologies, but of worldviews. They ask and they fight, as we can see in some of these fragments on these stills on screen, to live otherwise, within limits, relations, and responsibilities that challenge the inevitability of extractive futures presented in the name of green transition. Thank you so much. Look forward for your questions.
Thank you so much, Salomé, for a wonderful presentation and really valuable and unusual, I think, for the comparative perspective that you bring, questioning that kind of supposed European exceptionalism that we sometimes, that we quite often encounter, and speaking very eloquently about the role of cinema in making these issues visible and kind of sensible for us. For those, if you want to ask questions, you are very welcome to do so by putting a message in the chat, or you can otherwise raise your hand using the Zoom function if you'd like to ask a question that way. Did I just see one? Or no, I just imagined it. So maybe I'll give people a moment or two to come up with some questions and use my position as chair to ask one of my own. Salomé, I was kind of wondering throughout your presentation there how about the question of kind of audience or spectatorship and kind of how these films circulate. I mean, it's really interesting that you look at one that is itself a project outcome, which I think is fascinating. But how does the question of circulation and audience and kind of spectatorship feed into the framework of the analytical framework that you're setting out for us here?
Oh, I'm so happy that you asked that, Paul. Thank you, because I didn't have time to include it in the presentation, but it's a really interesting point related to the films. Its distribution and also the reception, of course. So one of the things that I'm looking into is how these films are made available, how they are produced. And as you see in the Andean Puna, there's this production and history of collaborative filmmaking that we see in Savannah and the Mountain. So in terms of distribution, they are all free. The ones that I mentioned, maybe I can go to that and just to share, if you don't mind, maybe I can share just the films, just to be talking more directly. So these three on the bottom are all free and accessible online. So you can have access to it. I'm not sure if they circulated through film festivals. The two on the top about Barroso, A Savania Montanha was premiered in Cannes and is not available online, which is also, I find it interesting. It's only circulating within film cinemas, film theaters. In cinemas and theaters. And the Lithium paradox is being presented in universities. It was presented last in Utrecht University in November, where I was present. So the discourse produced during the presentations is also very striking. In the case of Savannah and the Montanha, for instance, after every screening, almost every screening, there is a debate with villagers from Covas de Barroso, a very powerful intervention. Hopefully we'll have also this opportunity in Utrecht in April. One of the main figures of this grassroots movement will be here. So they are always combined with an aesthetic component in this case and a debate afterwards that allows to articulate in other dimensions, which is what is presented in the films. Terra Viva was also the Living Earth was also produced collectively, although it has a single name as an author, and is free, available also online. So, and the films produced in Andean Puna, I find it very, very direct in what they diagnose, strategies to overcome that diagnose, and very powerful as activist, let's call it eco-activist, as Gisela F's would call it, documentaries, films. I'm feeling that I'm missing something important about the spectatorship and the reception of the films. Well, in the case of Lithium Paradox, it was also very revealing how, for instance, this idea of the Europe exceptionalism was reinforced all the time. A sentence we used was, for instance, if in an ideal world where there's only Europe, and I will leave it here, but you see how this is the discourse produced surrounding the films during these debates are also very, very important. Yeah.
It's almost as if you've set out a kind of number of some quite different ways in which these films are, in which the ways in which they exist as well as which they circulate, and it's almost as if now with the difference between existing as a digital product that's freely available online versus something that is visible in cinemas or film festivals or in that with debates. It's almost like we're talking about different media here, really. Mm-hmm. They on a kind of superficial formal level, it is the same thing, but really it's a different. One could argue, I suppose, that these are actually different media.
Yes, and as a programmer, that I'm working on selecting some of these films to project and to generate these spaces also of discussion with the films. I'm also seeing that some of the most revealing films and powerful in terms of distributing guilt and accountability and diagnosing the problems of green extractivism are not have an imperfect aesthetics, as also Paula Serafini, that she also identified these in her analysis of environmental documentary films. So I see also these distinct elements. I'm looking also into film festivals. This is another part of my research, and how the discourse of these spaces are also intervening in the film and the other way around.
I find it fascinating that you mention imperfect aesthetics and also your discussion of these kind of almost built-in debates. Just so happens that I've been talking with some undergraduate students this week about third cinema and nuevo cine latinoamericano, and I was really struck by some of the parallels there. It's almost like a kind of updating for that in a very different world, of course. But yeah, some interesting how some of the kind of broad ideas about the relations between cinema and political change or political action recur.
We can identify some continuities between these more social, so-called social documentaries in Latin America and contemporary productions. We can definitely see it, and being and distribution in this case is really important. So it's not in terms just of the films, but for third cinema, for instance, the fact that the distribution included free, accessible, and discussions afterwards was as much as important as the film itself of this product. So there's a lot of intersections also between third cinema and social cinema, let's say, and political cinema, and these contemporary productions. Also in terms of collaborative production of the films, right? This dimension, I find it also very, very relevant to think these new forms of documentaries that are appearing, that it's almost impossible nowadays to do a documentary as an author, although the Lithium Paradox presents itself as a documentary, author's documentary, what is also, I don't know, I find it striking. There's someone who wants to ask.
Ollie, yes.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for that talk. I really enjoyed it. I was really, really struck by the quotation that you brought up. I think it was in the context of Barroso and the kind of identification of specific forms of labor and their kind of lack of utility and their kind of particular temporality. And it sort of immediately took me back to kind of constructions of the desert and desertification as kind of particularly grounded in spaces where there is an absence of labor, kind of that being a specific form of constructing the spatio-temporality of the desert in the kind of 19th century. And I was just kind of interested more broadly in this idea of labor and how it might get sort of framed in temporal terms. Are there kind of particular rhythms of labor which get inserted either in kind of the conformist visions, so kind of presenting particular, I don't know, if bureaucratic labor has a particular cinematic form or kind of cinematic temporality, and how that becomes kind of related to other forms of kind of resistant labor or kind of everyday labor or ancestral labor. So yeah, just if you could have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the Barrosão, the peoples from Barroso being labeled as, what's the word in English, lazy. You can just move around and see them at any time of the day because they have no discipline in labor. And this is produced in relatory is not the word. It is what's the word? So this is produced by Estado Novo institution, Junta da Colonização Interna, the internal colonization. So they are describing, and it was the first demographic and sociological study that was developed also in Portugal. So an entire characterization of these peoples, the ways of life, was actually the first sociological study and technico-scientific colonization of a space. So it was related to labor, it was related with gender. For instance, they were always saying a lot of women are the head of the family, which is, and they wrote about this, there was free love. They also write about this. So they are outside these norms and these values of the Estado Novo, of course, and relating specifically to the labor and to the work, this communal distribution of the space and the ways of living, how they circulate the elements of each space, how do they collectively decide, and how they relate to the seasonal, to the seasons. It's very singular, and that's also what the internal colonization wants to do. It's to change all of this, to privatize, to create, to stop the shepherd and to improve agriculture. So it's a specific way of cultivating these spaces. They want to implement agriculture, and saying that Barroso only wants to be a shepherd, nothing else. There's a great study on this by Elisa Lopes da Silva. I think I quoted her in my... It's in Portuguese. I don't know if you read Portuguese, but yeah. So she traces all the history of the internal colonization, and yeah. I don't know if I answered.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Any questions or comments, reflections from anyone else? Gianfranco, you
maybe I can jump in. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Salomé. I appreciate the presentation. I mean the project is fantastic. I think I have a couple of questions on. Maybe the first one is a follow up to what you were discussing with Paul before, because you talked about these. I was interested about production and who's behind production and who's the people doing these films, and is it mainly people affected by these specific extractive enterprises taking place in specific territories, or do we have, say, like, I don't know, filmmakers and people that have the professionals, so to speak, that are doing this kind of work? Because I guess like I'm missing the name now, but there is a colleague, a Peruvian. He's in the UK. Paul, maybe you can help me. Oh man,
what's the research about?
Yeah, no, I mean he's teaching about filmmaking, but he's also he's done a bunch of documentaries about mining in Peru.
Tito. I also would like to know the name.
Yeah,
I'll get back to you in a second. I know the person you mean.
Okay. So, but what I mean, Salomé, is basically that. I mean, so who's behind the production, and I mean, can you tell us more about that? Because I guess in terms of the aesthetics and all you've been talking about, there's obviously could be like a different attempt, right, in doing these documentaries. It's not only for like showing what's happening, but maybe documenting and registering what's going on, and just showing these to the wider public to sort of have more solidarity in terms of Ernesto Cabellos. Yes, exactly. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So in the case of the savanna and the mountain, for instance, the peoples from Covas de Barroso saw a film by Paulo Carneiro about a village very near from Covas in the region of Barroso. They loved the film and they called him and they said, "Can you come here and help us? We loved your film. We are in this situation fighting the implementation of lithium mine since 2017. Can you come here and help us to create, to mobilize through your films or through your videos?" And then he went to the village, and start doing some videos for social media. And he said everyone looked so sad, and it was so, it didn't mobilize. So they changed the strategy, and he actually, the main focus of the film was when he saw the carnival in the region where they dressed themselves as Northern Native American and cowboys and play with this Western style, and the film has a Western style. So it changed from and created an open film that doesn't have a strict message in some sense. So I see this, the production of these films as a form of mobilizing, with the aim of mobilizing. It's an alliance, or more an accomplices, like they are in the same struggle together, and they create these alliances to mobilize, but also to metabolize. I feel that cinema is an important part, and it was in this case of the savannah and the mountain, was an important way of having different emotions related to the subject. They had fun. This I was told this during an interview, that this was the fun part doing this film. So it was a space to have to see the question from other standpoint. For instance, in terms of the lithium paradox, there's been a lot of noise on this, fortunately, especially from Mining Watch Portugal, and Chile Without Ecocide, that are showing as that 25 projects from the European Union, funded by the European Union, as much as the project I'm part of, right? It's funded by ERC. So, but there is 118 million euros that are being given to these projects, and the aim is to convince and to get this social license to operate. Its aim, and I must add that the Portuguese government just gave at the beginning of this year 110 million euros to Savannah Resources. That's the name of the British company that is trying to install a lithium mine in Barroso, with a grant, not a loan, a grant to invest. So there's a lot of European money that is being mobilized to create this. And also universities, not just by European funds, but also Peter Tom Jones is the director of the Metals Institute in Leuven University in Belgium. So there are, on the other part, we have very artisanal and very spontaneous, let's say, and doing with what's available and creating these films through almost without means. So there's a lot of different questions of production. Terra Viva was made in collaboration with Zapatistas. This is a filmmaker, Paloma Ruiz, that was at the time working with Zapatistas. There were also in Barroso. So there's a lot of collective work here that I found, even in Savannah and the mountain, for instance, that is more single-authored. Even in these cases, there are very collaborative practices in the production level.
Thank you. I think Ernesto's work, you should definitely check that out. I mean,
it's very familiar, the name, yes.
Yeah, he has. We had these. It was like a film forum we organized at UCL last year, I think. And we had Ernesto with us, and he was talking about one of his documentaries, and it's the leak of a mining company in Peru, and how it affected the population. So a lot of what you're saying resonates with that. I guess the other question I have, and I think it's very much connected to that, and when you were talking about the ecologies of violence as this sort of kind of conceptual theoretical anchor of the project. Just wondering, I guess you've heard about the forensic aesthetics group, and do you dialogue with that? Because I think there's a lot to, there are a lot of like parallels you can, see there with, ecologies of violence and what the forensic aesthetics is basically doing, just using, film and art in general to document and to show basically, the violation of human rights, ecoviolence. So I don't know, just wondering.
Yeah, we have a team member that is looking into specifically into those fields. I don't engage directly with it. But the idea of the visualization, how this visualization is created of ongoing conflicts, it's of course very relevant, and it can give a lot of tips on how to do it. Yeah, but I don't engage with it so much.
Great. I think we've probably got time for one more question.
I think there's a question in the chat now.
Oh, so Francisca's asking, can we have access to the recording of the talk later? Yes, my understanding is that the recording will be available on the Claxo Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies website. So maybe if there aren't any others, Salomé, I just wanted to ask you about kind of about the kind of timeframes and also the position of this work within the broader project that you're doing, because this is obviously an area where the kind of the geopolitics of it is changing quite rapidly, right? I was just thinking about the fact that the new government that we've got in Bolivia has announced a really big shift in policy, right, and kind of really opening up the lithium resources to foreign investment, and in the Andean Puna region, there's at least the potential for that to be where there's a kind of arena for geopolitical conflict between European and North American and Chinese companies. So yeah, like how does this work for the kind of the broader project, and how do you? Because there's always a lag, I guess, isn't there, with film? Like it's not dealing with the actualities, and how does it? Yeah, how does this kind of fit into those sort of broader contexts?
But these films in particularly are from 2025, for instance.
So they are
very recent. Two of them appeared at the end of last year. But yeah, like Salares Andinos is from 2022, but it's still very up to date in the sense that addresses eco-colonialism, so geopolitical dimensions of this green extractivism. I'm looking also, I will be looking into Bangka Island in Indonesia. So trying to look into these connections between Dutch colonialism and the extraction of tin in this region, and how it fits, for instance, artificial intelligence. So I will be looking, my triangle will be also including Indonesia. We are in the team. We are looking into different regions and different media, but we are interested also how they remediate, how they circulate among different media. In terms of the up-to-date information and what films can do, if we look at films as ways of production also, and this contextualized distribution, the question of time is not essential, because the discussions will lead into contemporary and most updated events, for instance. But this is a very fast-shifting scenario, and yeah, it will be. But I think with the debates and the supply of the circulation of the films, the production of the films, and how they are, the reception of them also will open space to things more up to date. Sorry, I'm missing the word, but updated are addressed. Yeah, am I missing something? I don't know if someone from the project that is here wants to share this question of
I think you covered it really well, and it goes back to our earlier conversation about the diversity of forms, right, and the difference between a kind of short project film, science communication film that can be made quickly and hosted online versus something that is kind of longer form, film festival type documentary. Actually, when we're talking about film, we're really talking about lots of different kinds of filmmaking and video making here, aren't we? Right, we are just about out of time, so I just want to thank again Salomé for a brilliant talk and wonderful discussion. We're all really looking forward to seeing what else comes out of the project, the Indonesian connections as well. Gianfranco has just done what I was about to do, which is to remind you all of the next event in our series, which is on the 19th of March. You can see the link in the chat. It's called Listening to the Voices of the Rivers, Curatorial Practice and Water Ecologies, and we'll be speaking with Juliana Borea from Newcastle University. Thank you all very much for joining. Muito obrigado, Salomé. That was great, and hope to see lots of you again in March.
Thank you so much, Salomé. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much.